afternoon. And thank you very much for coming.
It has been a bad week for the Trump legal team that actually right now is holding a press conference that is so bananas we can't even bring it to you because it's just so full of BS.
So let's start with the specifics. Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, the margin of victory now for Biden, which is not a victory, it's a fraud, is 69,140 votes. The reality is that we are now at a count of 682,770 ballots, for which we have affidavits that there was no inspection of that ballot at the time that it was entered in the vote.
No one has come up with any evidence of fraud or abuse.
It was a mail ballot. Mail ballots are particularly prone to fraud. We were warned about that by Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter, and Secretary Baker in a report about a dozen years ago, in which they said that mail balloting is particularly susceptible of fraud, that we should very carefully consider ever doing it, and that it can be taken advantage of. Justice Souter warned us of the same thing in a comment in an election law case.
There's no issues of fraud anywhere.
And even the New York Times wrote articles about how dangerous mail-in voting was. And this is the first time we ever did it en masse, and I think we proved that all three are prophets. It's not only susceptible to fraud, it is easily susceptible to fraud, particularly if you have a plan or scheme which sounds eerily similar to what Joe Biden told us a few days before the election, that he had the best voter fraud team in the world.
Secondly, we're in a situation where we have put together, and you guys did it for our administration, the President Obama's administration before this. We have put together, I think, the most extensive and inclusive voter fraud organization in the history of American politics.
Well, they were good. I don't know that they were that good because they made significant mistakes, like all crooks do, and we caught them. One of them was pushing out Republican inspectors.
So, Steve, Neil Cavuto, a person with a conscience who understands not just that those are flagrant lies, there have been Trump observers in where all of the counting is ongoing.
You're not letting me in? Well, what? No. That's why I tell you, call the police. Do it. If you legal, call the cops.
The city guy is using the bathroom. He'll be there. Call that number. Tell him to call somebody.
I have a citywide watcher certificate.
Observers were allowed in vote counting stations.
It's not for this location.
No, it's not for this. It is not. Is this the city of Philadelphia? This is the city of Philadelphia. This is the city of Philadelphia. This is the city of Philadelphia. You wanted to talk. You wanted to talk outside. Let's talk. I have a watcher certificate. I asked you to read the line. The line said it's good in every ward and division in the city.
Every state, almost every civilized country, even Tanzania and places you wouldn't think of, have rules about inspectors, particularly for mail-in ballots. And why particularly for mail-in ballots? Because they can more easily be defrauded, and you can't check on it. Up until the mass cheating that went on in this election, a Republican and a Democrat inspector, as well as others, if there are other parties, is allowed to watch the unsealing of this ballot.
About Democrats, they cheated. It was a fraudulent election, which drew applause from the audience there. Again, not true. This was not a fraudulent election, and there's no evidence of that.
Because the only time you can ever find out if it's a fraudulent ballot is when it is looked at. The minute you approve this, it's thrown away, gone for eternity. The only thing left is the vote. That could have been Mickey Mouse. That could have been a dead person. That could have been not filled out properly. That could have been the same person 30 times. That could have been, and all these things have happened, by the way. That could have been nothing filled out. We'd never know. So, for example, the recount being done in Georgia will tell us nothing. because these fraudulent ballots will just be counted again because they wouldn't supply the signatures to match.
Those numbers don't legally add up for Trump. So that means even if he won some pending case, it's still game over in the election.
For example, in Pennsylvania, where we have probably our most precise evidence, 682,770 of these ballots were cast, put in, and they weren't inspected, which renders them ballots that are null and void, cannot be counted, have to be removed from the vote.
He made a bunch of allegations about fraud, again, without any evidence.
Why? For several reasons, not the least of which is that was basically only one of two places in the state where it was done. So in the other parts of the state, there was a legitimate inspection of the ballots. So if you have two different standards in different parts of the state, one favoring one part of the state, the other disfavoring the other part of the state, that's a classic violation of the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution. Bush v. Gore being the most recent case that teaches that. That's not the only fraud that went on in Pennsylvania. All of the other frauds carried out in the other states by the Democrat bosses happened there as well. For example, if you made a mistake in that ballot and you lived in Philadelphia or in Pittsburgh, you were allowed to fix the mistake.
The votes will continue to be counted until every valid mail-in ballot, absentee ballot, and provisional ballot is counted. So while some, including the president, continue to spew baseless claims of fraud, claims for which his team has not produced one iota of evidence, what we have seen here in Philadelphia is democracy, pure and simple.
But if you lived in what would be considered more Republican or Trump parts of the state, you were given no such right. One of our plaintiffs, Mr. Henry, cast an absentee ballot, and he failed to put it in the secure envelope inside. He just put it in open, naked. That ballot was cast aside because it was invalid, because that breaks the privacy of the vote. In Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia, if they noticed that there wasn't an inner envelope, they'd contact the voter and allow him to vote again. Or if he didn't fill it out completely, or if he made a mistake and didn't sign his full name, he was allowed to cure it. There is no such provision under the law of Pennsylvania. The Democrat Secretary of State made that up in order to maximize the votes in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and to minimize the votes in the other parts of the state. Clearly illegal, clearly voter fraud, easily provable, hundreds of witnesses, maybe thousands.
When Donald Trump also wanted to talk up prosecuting voter fraud, which didn't exist, wasn't found in a way that changes this race.
We have, to give you another example, we have 17,000 provisional ballots cast in Pittsburgh. Do you know what a provisional ballot is? Provisional ballot usually happens this way, and about 15 of the 17,000 happen this way. You walk in and you say, "I'm here to vote today." "Oh, Mr. Giuliani, you already voted." "I did? I don't remember voting." "Oh, yes, you cast an absentee ballot." "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did." "No, I didn't." "Yes, you did." So why does that happen 17,000 times in Pittsburgh? People walked in thinking actually 15,000 to be precise. Why did it happen 15,000 times that people in Pittsburgh walked in to vote and they had already voted according to the Democrat election machine?
The president-elect is the president, and Donald Trump is acting like a two-bit criminal.
He wanted to do crime. Brings me no joy as a reporter or American to say that that's what the evidence shows. The president wanted to do election crimes specifically.
We now have a president manufacturing. He is the fraud. The fraud is now the president.
Did they forget? That many people with bad memories in Pittsburgh? Or is the following correct? That as witnesses will testify, they were instructed by the Democrat bosses when they had a ballot in which there was no one registered, just assign it to somebody. Just assign it to Rudy Giuliani. So when maybe Rudy Giuliani won't show up to vote. And if he does show up to vote, we'll give him a provisional ballot. That is what we call circumstantial evidence of the fraud. The direct evidence of the fraud are the people who will testify that, in fact, that's what happened to them, as well as the 50 to 60 witnesses we have for the way they were treated and not allowed to inspect the ballots. They weren't just not allowed to do it. They were pushed. A few cases they were assaulted. In all cases, they were put in a corral so far away, probably the closest they got is from here to the back of that room. They couldn't see a thing. Now, I don't know. You're going to tell me that 60 people are lying? They didn't just tell me this. They swore under penalty of perjury, which is something no Democrat's ever done. You don't even ask Biden about this. You don't put him under penalty of perjury. He doesn't even get asked questions about it. He doesn't get asked questions about all the evidence of the crimes that he committed. These people are under penalty of perjury. Their names are on an affidavit. They swear that they weren't allowed to carry out their function as inspectors. And it's not just a technical thing. There's a reason they did it. Why would you not allow people to carry out the function they've been allowed to do for 50 years, 60 years? Why wouldn't you allow inspections of those ballots? Because you knew you were going to use those ballots to catch Biden up. And you had a big road ahead of you. You had to catch him up for 700,000 to 800,000 votes that he was behind. And the only way you were going to do it was with the mail-in ballots. You couldn't have a Democrat and Republican inspector around. They don't even have Democrats watching it, because they'd be afraid that there'd be honest Democrats who would say, you're cheating.
They now want to front-run fraud issues without proof. Even Mitch McConnell, refusing to recognize President-elect Biden's victory, he wouldn't contradict Trump's lies that the election was stolen from him, but he didn't have any proof to offer. He didn't say he saw any proof. He offers nothing but more poison politics. You want proof of that? Before his remarks, McConnell met with Attorney General Bill Barr, and guess what happened then? Soon after, Barr authorized federal prosecutors across America to pursue, quote, any substantial allegations of voting irregularities before the election is certified, despite zero evidence. Again, you have to keep saying that because this isn't how it works. If you think something happened, you prove it. Are irregularities even crimes? And what substantial allegations?
So that takes us to Michigan, where there was an honest Democrat who said they were cheating. And we'll show you her affidavit, because I know you keep reporting falsely that we have no evidence, that we have no specific acts of fraud. That's because the coverage of this has been almost as dishonest as the scheme itself. The American people are entitled to know this. You don't have a right to keep it from them. You don't have a right to lie about it. And you are. I mean, you don't report to them that a citizen of this country, a very fine woman, who is willing to allow me to give you her name. I can't give you all these affidavits, because if I do, these people will be harassed. They'll be threatened. They may lose their job. They will lose their friends. We've lost lawyers in this case because they've been threatened. We've had lawyers that need protection. What's going on in this country is horrible, and the censorship that you're imposing is making it worse.
And this is simply after William Barr issued a memo to federal prosecutors saying you can investigate possible election crimes here. But he also included other limitations, like it has to be a case that will change the outcome in a state, which we know is not out there. That case isn't going to be found.
But Jesse Jacob is an adult citizen and a resident of the state of Michigan. She's been an employee of the city of Detroit for decades. I know her age, but she can tell you her age. She was assigned to voting duties in September, and she was trained by the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. She was basically trained to cheat. She said that I was instructed by my supervisor to adjust the mailing date of these absentee ballot packages to be dated earlier than when they were actually sent in. The supervisor made that announcement for all workers to engage in that fraudulent practice. That's not me saying that. That's just American citizens saying that under oath. I don't know. Maybe you could say she's lying, but you can't say there's no evidence. This is what we call evidence. This is direct evidence.
And while Joe Biden looks forward, President Trump is pushing unsubstantiated claims of election fraud.
That's circumstantial. I tried many, many cases, as did all my colleagues here. You put a witness on a witness stand, the witness is testifying to their own knowledge. This witness goes on the witness stand and she will say, I was told to adjust the date on the absentee ballots. I witnessed election workers and employees going over to the voting booths with voters in order to watch them vote and coach them for whom to vote. Completely illegal. She will testify to that. I don't know. Biden's people can cross-examine her, but you can't just throw it away. Gee, there's no evidence. Next time you say that, you'll be lying. Because there is evidence. This, oh, by the way, this is public. You can all get it. It's attached to the complaint in Costantino versus the city of Detroit.
There's no evidence of systemic fraud in the election.
Then she was instructed by my supervisor not to ask for a driver's license or any photo ID when a person was trying to vote. Don't ask for identification. Why would you not ask for identification? Because you knew that a lot of people not entitled to vote were going to come in and early vote. Because you knew that illegal immigrants were going to be allowed to vote. You knew, if you lived in Philadelphia, unless you're stunad, that's an Italian expression for stupid, unless you're stupid, you knew that a lot of people were coming over from Camden to vote. They do every year. Happens all the time in Philly. It's about as frequent as getting beaten up at a Philadelphia Eagle football game. Happens all the time. All the time. And it's allowed to happen because it is a Democrat, corrupt city. And has been for years. Many, many years. And they carried it out in places they could get away with it. They didn't carry it out in neutral places. They didn't carry it out in Republican places. They didn't carry it out where the law is respected. They carry it out in a corrupt city where the district attorney releases criminals en masse, which is why it has so much crime. She also said, I observed a large number of people who came to the satellite location to vote in person, but they had already applied for and submitted an absentee ballot. So she observed a lot of people voting twice.
The situation on the ground is math and reality. I mean, I don't know how else to convince anybody other than math and reality.
Again, this is Jesse Jacob, not me. I was instructed not to invalidate any ballots and not to look for any deficiency in the ballots.
To be clear, there have been no credible allegations of fraud that would affect the outcome of the election in any of the states. None. This is happening at a pure spite.
This is an instruction from the election commissioner or the employer to the worker. Don't look for any deficiencies in the ballots. I was instructed not to look at any of the signatures the absentee ballots. If she was instructed to not to look for any of the signatures on the absentee ballots, why the heck do you sign it in the first place? In order to identify it. She was instructed not to do that because many of the absentee ballots were fraudulent, and they knew that, and they didn't want to have a count of that.
Well, I don't think that Donald Trump or the Republican Party, for that matter, is capable of discontinuing their disinformation campaign.
On November 4, 2020, I was instructed to improperly predate the absentee ballots when the receipt date was actually was after November 3rd, 2020. Now, this is really significant because Justice Alito of the Supreme Court instructed Pennsylvania that any ballot that comes in after 8 o'clock on November 3rd, 2020, had to be put aside and not opened because there's a question as to its legality and its constitutionality. What she's telling you is that they blatantly disregarded that order, that they took ballots that were marked the 4th and the 5th and the 6th, and they marked it down for the 3rd in blatant disregard of the order of the United States Supreme Court. This is I don't know if she's a Democrat or Republican. I assume if she's working for the city of Detroit that she's a Democrat. I assume, but I may be wrong. She's a citizen. I've never met her, never coached her. And I'd like you to note that it's signed under penalties of perjury. We have 100 more of these. I can't show them to you because those people don't want to be harassed. They don't want to have their lives torn apart by the goons on the other side. We don't do that to them. They've done that to a lot of our people. They've done it for 4 years. And it's outrageous that it's tolerated, and it's tolerated because you condone it in the press, and you don't cover it, and you don't condemn it. And it shouldn't happen to a Republican or a Democrat. A lawyer shouldn't have to withdraw from a case because he's representing the President of the United States.
Washington Post noting that after Giuliani's bizarre press conference, which was filled with unsourced conspiracy theories and all sorts of other problems.
There are many more affidavits here. I'd like to read them all to you, but I don't have the time. You should have had the time and energy to go look for them. That's your job. Like it's my job to defend the president and to represent the president. It's your job to read these things and not falsely report that there's no evidence.
Even though there just hasn't been any evidence to back up these claims of widespread fraud.
Do you know how many affidavits we have in the Michigan case? 220 affidavits. They're not all public, but 8 of them are. 4 affiants here, those are people who give affidavits, report an incident that under any other circumstances would have been on the front page of all your newspapers if it didn't involve the hatred that you have, irrational, pathological hatred that you have for the president.
As President Trump refuses to acknowledge his election loss and makes baseless claims about voter fraud.
When it comes to the election, Republicans, congressional Republicans, don't have the evidence. They don't have the proof. They don't have anything. Neither does the president. Congressional Republicans are deliberately casting doubt on our elections for no other reason but fear of Donald Trump.
So given all of that, this ongoing Republican refusal to accept the reality of the election is really getting even harder to understand. State officials, both Republicans and Democrats, have all said there was no widespread fraud.
So the Department of Homeland Security just came out with a statement yesterday calling this the most secure election in American history.
There's just no there there. I mean, when his own Homeland Security Department rebukes these conspiracy theories as thoroughly as they did yesterday and as forcefully as they did, I think it's pretty clear that the president himself, they've yet to produce an ounce of evidence to support any of their baseless claims.
Conspiracy theories that nobody believes. And again, here's the tell, all right? Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump, the rest of Trump's gang are lying through their teeth. Mark Meadows, they're all liars. They're all lying through their teeth, and they're telling you
things happen that never happened.
What they swear to is that at 4:30 in the morning, a truck pulled up to the Detroit center where they were counting ballots.
No one has come up with any evidence of any fraud. No one's found a pickup truck with a bunch of ballots in the back.
The people thought it was food, so they all ran to the truck. It wasn't food. It was thousands and thousands of ballots. And the ballots were in garbage cans, they were in paper bags, they were in cardboard boxes, and they were taken into the center. They were put on a number of tables. At that time, they thought all the Republican inspectors had left, all but two had, and an employee of Dominion, who we will address a little bit later, Dominion. And here's what they jointly swear to, that every ballot that they could see, everything they could hear, these were ballots for Biden. When they saw a ballot, these were ballots only for Biden, meaning there was no down ticket, just Biden. Many of them didn't have anything on the outer envelope because these ballots were produced very quickly, very swiftly, and they're estimated to be a minimum of 60,000, maximum of 100,000. Many of them were triple counted.
I mean, they're trying to make an assertion that the election was rigged, and there's literally zero evidence.
I mean, what's happened to this country if we're going to let that happen? What happened to this country if we're going to cover that up? We let Al Gore carry on an election dispute longer than this one has been going on for one state and for Chad's. This happened in Pennsylvania. It happened in Michigan. Michigan probably right now, if I count up the affidavits, just one case alone, Trump v. Benson.
And beyond that, Jim, we're starting to see the Trump campaign and its surrogates dismiss their own lawsuits. We've now seen one lawsuit withdrawn. We saw another appeal withdrawn just the other day. That, I think, is a warning sign. You don't see that very often. When the Trump campaign is pulling back its own lawsuits, I think that's a flashing red light that they're in trouble.
A case that we dismissed today because that case was attempting to get the Wayne County Board of Supervisors to decertify. Well, they did. They decertified.
But there's just no substance there.
That case has 100 affidavits. And the 100 affidavits show essentially what I've talked to you about. Counting ballots improperly, counting them 3 and 4 times, having people vote 3 and 4 times, changing and backdating ballots to the point of at least 300,000 illegitimate ballots that we can specifically identify. The margin in Michigan was 146,121, and these ballots were all cast basically in Detroit that Biden won 80-20. So you see a change as a result of the election in Michigan if you take out Wayne County. So it's a very significant case. That is being raised in the case of Costantino versus the city of Detroit.
Yeah. There's another tell, though, and it has to do with Mitch McConnell, and it has to do with the Republicans, who we gave the benefit of the doubt to at the beginning of this process, even though none of them deserved the benefit of the doubt. Well, and we said this. Excuse me, I'll just finish and then you can go. We said this to Mitch McConnell, and it was, okay, we'll go along with you. Count all the votes. You're right. All the votes need to be counted. And yes, and then if you still, despite the fact you know, Mitch McConnell, that Joe Biden is going to be president of the United States because these numbers, this advantage is so big that Trump can never catch up, then go ahead and go through the legal process. If that makes you feel better, if that makes your base feel better, go through the legal process. We've done that. They have if they had any credible allegations of widespread fraud and abuse, it would have come forward, but they don't.
Wisconsin had a very small margin, 20,544 last time I looked. In Wisconsin, without going into great detail, very similar plan. Republicans shut out in the city of Milwaukee and also in Madison. Republicans almost uniformly shut out from the absentee process, not allowed to inspect, not allowed to look at the ballots. We have in Milwaukee and in the state of Wisconsin a much stricter law. Wisconsin doesn't allow mail-in ballots. They didn't buy into the big mail-in ballot situation. Wisconsin, when you look at their constitution, almost seems to not like absentee ballots. They state it's not a right, a privilege. And they have very, very strict procedures. And the strict procedure says that you can't be given an absentee ballot. You have to personally apply for it. It's illegal, basically, to solicit a vote.
Rudy Giuliani ensnarled in a conspiracy to undermine American democracy. Let me say this. This isn't part of the shock opera. I'm not shocked or stunned or deeply saddened. I know who's going to be president of the United States on January 20th, 2021.
So there are 60,000 ballots in Milwaukee County and 40,000 ballots in Madison that, as far as we can tell, and this is why we're auditing, because we have very good information, the numbers are going to come out about here, that don't have applications. Under the law of the state of Wisconsin, already decided, if there's no application for an absentee ballot, the absentee ballot is thrown away. This all happened in two places in Wisconsin. Didn't happen in northern Wisconsin. Didn't happen in Republican Wisconsin. Didn't happen in neutral Wisconsin, where there are an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. It happened in a place where the vote was 75, 80% for the Democrat. You take away any number of those, and that 20,000 lead disappears. In other words, if you count the lawful votes, Trump won Wisconsin by a good margin. Indeed, if you count the lawful votes in Pennsylvania, he won it by about 300,000 votes.
Rudy and Sidney Powell sounded like lunatics. The things he was saying were so demonstrably false.
Also, in the lawsuit filed in Wisconsin, which is really a petition because of their procedures, there were no inspectors provided for the count of the illegal ballots. There were numerous backdated ballots. We're just counting them now, run over into the thousands. And there were many precincts in which there was an overvote.
Trump is standing himself in historical fashion. He was already the worst president in my view. Now he's probably the most unpatriotic person in the country's history. Trump had conceded and beginning to plan how to manage the dark winter that's coming for he and his family. And to have the president of the United States, who basically leads a cult now, he doesn't lead a modern political party. And to have so many members of that cult, some who believe it, in my view, most don't believe it. And that's even more of a sin. They know it's all BS, and they're going along with it because they're afraid of him. And it is pathetic, historically so.
Now let me explain to you what an overvote is, which is something you should have explained to the American people, because it's about the clearest circumstantial evidence of massive fraud that you can have. An overvote is if 200% of the people who are registered in a district vote. Think about that. 200% of the registered voters in a district vote. What does that mean? That means somebody voted twice. That means somebody who's not entitled to vote voted, an illegal, a person from another city or state, a person who's not registered. But what it means is that those are illegitimate votes. You don't have an overvote of 200% or 300%. You don't have an overvote of 100%. Most precincts don't have 100% turnout. In fact, classically, it's considered to be an overvote if you go over 80%. Well, in Michigan and Wisconsin, we have overvotes in numerous precincts of 150%, 200%, and 300%. One of the reasons why the two Republicans did not certify in Wayne, Michigan, Wayne County, Michigan, is because the overvote was so high, monstrously high. in about 2/3 of the precincts in the city of Detroit.
This is in Wayne County, Michigan, where they continue to be at odds about certifying in that county. We're getting an update there now. It's happening live. You're going to see it right here on News Now from Fox. Live, raw, oh yeah, and unfiltered as well.
Report of what the vote totals were. It was well after 3 o'clock before we received a 77-page report with the vote totals. We were not provided with a written copy of the executive summary that gives you a plus-minus report per precinct, so you can understand which precincts are in balance, which precincts are out of balance, and which precincts are out of balance unexplained. The key here is the unexplained precincts. I asked for a written copy of that report before we began the meeting. Was told it wasn't available at the time. Wayne County Director of Elections, Greg Marr, provided a staff report, and in that staff report, he gave us the executive summary verbally. If you were watching the Zoom call or in the meeting, you saw us frantically trying to write down the numbers of the precincts for the different communities in Wayne County and within Detroit. I did the math while I was sitting there, and it appeared that 70% of the Detroit absentee counting boards were out of balance unexplained. We have a repeat of the primary. The job of a canvasser is to make sure that you understand the differences between the number of ballots that are validly issued and received and the number of votes totaled. If there is a difference, you need to have an explanation. That is the job of the canvass. That did not occur in the 2 weeks that we had to canvass. That is why I voted no for the certification. Not just for Detroit, not to take votes away from anyone. It was to give the state the additional 10 days to do their investigation to get the answers to why the balances didn't match. Immediately upon voting no, my other board members made statements and immediately brought in the words racism and partisanship. My intent with my no vote was to make sure that we got the answers so that the voters of Detroit can have recountable precincts. It has nothing to do with black or white. After commentary from my board members and legal counsel informing me that I didn't have discretion to vote no, when I believe the documentation was not complete and accurate. My question is, if a board of canvasser doesn't have discretion to vote yes or no, why is there even a board of canvassers? We continued on with public comment. I endured about 2 hours worth of commentary, most of it calling me a racist, some of them getting personal and bringing my daughter into the situation and announcing to the world what city I live in and what school my daughter attends. During that public commentary, Vice Chair Kinloch pulled me into the back of the warehouse and offered me a compromise. He said he'd been on the phone with Democrats all throughout the state trying to find a solution to help certify the results in Wayne County. He assured me that he had confirmation from Governor Whitmer that they would be able to get an independent audit done to clarify the precincts that were unexplained in their differences. I asked him to draft up a motion because there were a few complications in exactly how we were going to describe an independent audit, independent comprehensive audit, to answer those questions. A softball audit of basically redoing the canvas may not catch it. It needs to be comprehensive. We went back out to the tables in the public. Vice Chair Kinloch met with the rest of the board members individually as to not cross any lines with the Open Meetings Act, and we came back, reconvened, and had a vote. Unfortunately, at that time, the Zoom conference on the laptop had been muted, and the public that was watching online was not able to hear the commentary with that motion being made. I saw an opportunity with that motion that Vice Chair Kinloch made to get to the bottom of the unexplained precincts. A comprehensive audit would attain the job that the canvass needs to do, and that is why I decided to vote yes on that motion. When that motion was passed, at the later point in the evening, we wrapped up the meeting shortly thereafter. With the amount of angry comments and threats that were coming in, I ended up leaving for my safety. I want to be clear that the documentation, the signatures on the final statement of votes that were voted to be certified, I did not physically sign. If there is a signature on that document, it was my signature stamp used without my approval. I do not have a copy of that document at this time to confirm if they put the signature stamp on it or not. It was brought to my attention that minutes after we took the vote, Secretary Benson was on TV saying that anything that we did in the motion was non-binding and that she wasn't agreeing to it. I made a good faith effort in that compromise with Vice Chair Kinloch and was misled. Right now, the State Board of Canvassers has the issue at their hands. I have provided them with a copy of my affidavit rescinding my vote. That motion to certify was contingent upon the comprehensive audit that needs to be done before there is a certification by the state. An audit after the fact is not going to answer those unexplained precincts, and they still will not be recountable. Another point that I want to make is that this is not about the presidential election. Most often the recounts are going to come for local candidates, city councils, school boards, mayors. When you're in a local community and you file for a recount and you walk in and half of the precincts can't be recounted because there's no answer as to why they don't match, that candidate and all the voters in that local district are disenfranchised. And with that, I guess we can start taking questions.
Which means magically 2 and 3 times the number of registered voters turned out to vote. In fact, we have precincts in which 2 times the number of people who live there, including children, voted. That's absurd. The frustration of this is, what I'm describing to you is a massive fraud. It isn't a little teeny one. It isn't, 100 votes switched here or there. Georgia, we're about to file a major lawsuit in Georgia. That'll be filed probably tomorrow. I don't need to go through it. Virtually the same things I've told you before. In the city of Atlanta, Republicans were not allowed to watch the absentee mail-in ballot process. Inspections completely cast aside. And we have numerous double voters. We have numerous out-of-state voters. And we have specific evidence of intimidation and changes of vote. That'll all be in the lawsuit that comes out tomorrow. Arizona is a state that we're looking at very, very carefully. And the state that we're looking at that would surprise you is we have very, very significant amount of fraud allegations in the state of New Mexico. And we have a significant number of allegations in the state of Virginia.
Most rank and file are silently enabling the president's false fraud claims.
And Donald Trump can just keep lying, but he'll have less of a megaphone to yell into once he's no longer the president on January 20th.
We more than double the number of votes needed to overturn the election in terms of provable illegal ballots. All you got to do to find out if I'm misleading you at all is to look at the lawsuits. Look what's alleged. Look at the affidavits. Maybe we can supply more affidavits. In order to do it, I have to get permission from the people. But in the materials I have here, there are at least 10 that come from citizens. We have 1,000 at least, and we're getting more every day. It's enough to overturn any election. It's disgraceful what happened. We cannot let this happen to us. We cannot allow these crooks, because that's what they are, to steal an election from the American people. They elected Donald Trump. They didn't elect Joe Biden. Joe Biden is in the lead because of the fraudulent ballots, the illegal ballots that were produced and that were allowed to be used after the election was over. Give us an opportunity to prove it in court, and we will.
You don't oppose an audit of the vote because you want an accurate count. You don't oppose our efforts at sunlight and transparency because you have nothing to hide. You take these positions because you are welcoming fraud and you are welcoming illegal voting. Our position is clear. We want to protect the franchise of the American people. We want an honest, accurate, lawful count. We want maximum sunlight. We want maximum transparency. We want every legal vote to be counted, and we want every illegal vote to be...
I just think we have to be very clear. She's charging the other side is welcoming fraud and welcoming illegal voting, unless she has more details to back that up.
What we are really dealing with here and uncovering more by the day is the massive influence of communist money through Venezuela, Cuba, and likely China in the interference with our elections here in the United States. The Dominion voting systems, the Smartmatic technology software, and the software that goes in other computerized voting systems here as well, not just Dominion, were created in Venezuela at the direction of Hugo Chavez to make sure he never lost an election after one constitutional referendum came out the way he did not want it to come out. We have one very strong witness who has explained how it all works. His affidavit is attached to the pleadings of Lynn Wood in the lawsuit he filed in Georgia.
Republicans are going to fall in line eventually. And again, I understand they have to pander to the lunatic fringe elements of their party, but everybody knows that Joe Biden won Pennsylvania and Michigan, and that he's the president-elect.
It is a stunning, detailed affidavit because he was with Hugo Chavez while he was being briefed on how it worked. He was with Hugo Chavez when he saw it operate to make sure the election came out his way. That was the express purpose for creating this software. He has seen it operate, and as soon as he saw the multiple states shut down the voting on the night of the election, he knew the same thing was happening here, that was what had gone on. Now, the software itself was created with so many variables and so many back doors that can be hooked up to the internet or a thumb drive stuck in it or whatever, but one of its most characteristic features is its ability to flip votes. It can set and run an algorithm that probably ran all over the country to take a certain percentage of votes from President Trump and flip them to President Biden, which we might never have uncovered had the votes for President Trump not been so overwhelming in so many of these states that it broke the algorithm that had been plugged into the system. And that's what caused them to have to shut down in the states they shut down in. That's when they came in the back door with all the mail-in ballots, many of which they had actually fabricated. Some were on pristine paper with identically matching perfect circle dots for Mr. Biden. Others were shoved in batches. They're always put in a certain number of batches, and people would rerun the same batch. This corresponds to our statistical evidence that shows incredible spikes in the vote counts at particular times, and that corresponds to eyewitness testimony of numerous people who have come forward and said they saw the ballots come in the back door at that time. Notably, the Dominion executives are nowhere to be found now. They are moving their offices overnight. to different places. Their office in Toronto was shared with one of the Soros entities. One of the leaders of the Dominion project in overall is Lord Malloch Brown, Mr. Soros' number 2 person in the UK and part of his organization. There are ties of the Dominion leadership to the Clinton Foundation.
Powell says the campaign has enough proof to overturn election results across multiple states. And Dominion Voting Systems, of course, denies its bias towards Democrats. But today it did confirm it made a donation to the Clinton Foundation in 2014. It also confirmed it hired Nancy Pelosi's former chief of staff as a lobbyist, but it says it has another lobbyist who worked for Republicans like Dick Cheney. Dominion also refutes other claims. It says it has no company ownership relationships with the Pelosi family, the Feinstein family, or the Clinton Global Initiative. It also says it has no ties to voting software maker Smartmatic, which we have more on later, or any ties to Venezuela. But new witness testimony perhaps contradicts Dominion's statement on its Venezuela ties. It says the same voting technology used in the U.S. election facilitated systematic fraud over the last 2 decades in Venezuela. The whistleblower says he or she has a high-level Venezuelan military background. Here's the details.
An alleged whistleblower has come forward. The person claims to have witnessed how election software secretly manipulates votes without leaving a trace. Trump campaign lawyer and former federal prosecutor Sidney Powell released a sworn affidavit from the individual. The whistleblower alleges witnessing a plot to create a sophisticated electronic voting system to manipulate the tabulation of votes, giving the ability to select the winner. This was accomplished between Smartmatic software executives, the former Venezuelan dictator Hugo Chavez, and Venezuela's election officials. The whistleblower says his or her background is with the Venezuelan military at the level of protecting the Venezuelan president. According to the affidavit, the successful operation of the electronic voting system meant the Venezuelan government was able to gain and maintain their power. From that point on, Chavez never lost any election. In fact, he was able to ensure wins for himself, his party, congresspersons, and mayors from townships. The significance of the whistleblower's claims to the U.S. election is this. Other election tabulating companies rely on software descended from the Smartmatic electoral management system. That includes Dominion Voting Systems.
And to other known politicians in this country. Just to give you a brief description of how this worked, I'm going to quote from a letter that was written, and I will read that to make sure I get the quotes right. This person was objecting to the United States acquisition of Sequoia Voting Systems by Smartmatic, a foreign-owned company. I believe this transaction raises exactly the sort of foreign ownership issues that CFIUS is best positioned to examine for national security purposes. It's undisputed that Smartmatic is foreign-owned and it has acquired Sequoia. They keep changing the names as they go along. Different times when a problem comes up, they just create another corporation and call it a different name. But it was a voting machine company doing business in the United States. Sequoia voting machines were used to record over 125 million votes during the 2004 presidential election in the United States. Smartmatic now acknowledges that Antonio Mujica, a Venezuelan businessman, has controlling interest in Smartmatic, but the company has not revealed who all the Smartmatic owners are. According to the press, Smartmatic's owners are hidden through a web of offshore private entities, and that is, in fact, true. Smartmatic has been associated with the Venezuelan government led by Hugo Chavez, which is openly hostile to the United States, and of course, as we all know, communistic and really brutalizing its own people. The system has been continued there by Mr. Maduro and ensured his election. Smartmatic's possible connection to the Venezuelan government poses a potential national security concern in the context of its acquisition of Sequoia, because electronic voting machines are susceptible to tampering, and insiders are in the best position to engage in such tampering. This letter expresses concern of the Chicago 2006 primary election. And it ends by saying the products and services that are of Venezuelan origin, and evaluate Smartmatic's ownership to determine who could have influence and control over these and other Sequoia products and services are important to the national security of the United States. This letter was written to Hank Paulson on October 6, 2006 by Congresswoman Carolyn B. Maloney. Senators Klobuchar and Warren have raised these concerns as recently as December 2019. Why our government has not taken them seriously is beyond my comprehension, unless they have, some of the three-letter agencies have used them themselves.
Now is Minnesota Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar. Senator, thank you very much for being here. Frankly, I want to ask you these questions. I would have rather asked a Republican in leadership these questions. Mitch McConnell would be great to have on my show if he would ever join me. Frankly, any Republican senator on this show would be wonderful to have right now so I can ask these questions. Unfortunately, they're not coming on. So here's where we are. I'm asking you this. What in the world is going on? And did you ever think that it would get this far where the president would be trying to overturn a Democratic election and most of your Republican colleagues would just be silent?
It makes me sad, Katie. It truly does. Sad for our democracy, sad for them. You have, as you noted, people condemning what Rudy Giuliani said yesterday. And I can't, after spending this morning at the University of Minnesota with a doctor there, after talking on a call with my rural mayors, separate this from the pandemic anymore. I don't know how our Republican colleagues can. People are dying. But right now, as I look at an ambulance across the street from my house, probably getting someone across the way, right now, what we need is a transition so the next team can get up and running. This, if you want some hope, there is good news on those vaccinations, but we're not going to be able to get them out. We need 103-degree below zero freezers if we don't have a seamless transition with the next administration. So look at it that way. If you put all the political BS aside, and if you put all of Rudy Giuliani's craziness aside, you're down to this. We've got to save lives. We have to move this country forward. We have to work as one team. That's the reason to move the transition.
I do want to ask you one more question, and this is about Chris Krebs, the former director of CISA at DHS, who the president just fired. As to that press conference that we showed at the top there, the Rudy Giuliani press conference, he tweeted that it was the most dangerous 1 hour and 45 minutes of television in American history and possibly the craziest. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you're lucky.
He knows he's the one that was appointed by Donald Trump, but yet maintained his integrity throughout his job. And remember, when Donald Trump fired him, simply because this guy took charge of this agency, the CISA, which is under Homeland Security, managed thousands of employees, and put out a statement that this past election was the most secure in American history. That's a fact.
And now a government election watchdog insists the election was the most secure in American history. The Elections Infrastructure Government Coordinating Council and the Election Infrastructure Sector Coordinating Committees, part of the Department of Homeland Security, issued a joint statement and emphasised in bold type, there is no evidence that any voting system deleted or lost votes, changed votes, or was in any way compromised.
In other parts of the world, we know that the technology was exported to affect an election in Argentina. That's admitted by our friend who wrote the affidavit about Hugo Chavez and his interest in Smartmatic. Again, in 2006, Carolyn Maloney wrote the Honorable John Snow, the Secretary of the Treasury, about the issues. Speaking of Smartmatic's leadership, one of the Smartmatic patent holders, Eric Coomer, I believe his name is on the web as being recorded in a conversation with Antifa members saying that he had the election rigged for Mr. Biden, nothing to worry about here, and they were going to F Trump. His social media is filled with hatred for the president and for the United States of America as a whole, as are the social media accounts of many other Smartmatic people. There has been widespread use of this.
And in a strange twist in the tale, you might remember last week we told you that the Department of Homeland Security's cybersecurity agency called the 2020 election the most secure in American history. But it turns out that Dominion is a member of one of the councils that issued the statement. The other voting machine company, Smartmatic, is also a member.
Dominion itself is utilized in 2,000 jurisdictions in 30 states. It has been uncertifiable in multiple states who realized all the problems that it had, including Texas. Experts have described it across the board, from a Princeton group of 3 professors to experts that we have talked to about its end user vulnerabilities. People can admittedly go in and change whatever they want. They can set the ratio of votes from one thing to another. They can say that a Biden vote counts as 1.25 and a Trump vote counts as 0.75. And those may be the numbers that were actually used here. It's not just the swing states that were affected. The algorithm was likely run across the country to affect the entire election. Like I said, we only discovered it this year because of the overwhelming number of votes for President Trump in the swing states that caused the machines to have to shut down for them to backfill for adding votes.
Now, again, Heather, those are baseless claims from Donald Trump, pushing these baseless allegations of widespread fraud, repudiating the president making these baseless claims from people like Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. This isn't particularly surprising because for months at this point, Donald Trump has been trying to cast doubt on the integrity of the election without any evidence, but it is still stunning to hear the President of the United States make baseless claims from the White House.
We have evidence of different numbers of votes being injected into the system, the same identical, unique 6-digit number multiple times in at least 2 states that we've analyzed so far, and I'm talking about like 341,542 votes for Biden and 100,012 for Trump. There's no explanation, no logical explanation for the same numbers being injected 20 minutes apart into the machine. The software manual itself, you can download it from the internet, and I would encourage you all to read it because it specifically advertises some of these things as features of the system. Why it was ever allowed into this country is beyond my comprehension, and why nobody has dealt with it is absolutely appalling. The machines were easily accessible to hackers. There's a video on the net that it will explain to you how a kid with a cell phone can hack one of these voting machines.
He has said this was the most secure election in history. He has also swatted down the president's conspiracy theory about this Dominion voting software machine, saying that there is no evidence, as the president has suggested, that any of this software had deleted votes or attributed votes to another candidate, despite what the president has said here. So this is something that Christopher Krebs and his team knew was coming. He had been very aware in the days leading up to this that he expected to likely be fired by the president of the United States.
There's been no oversight of Dominion or its software. Workers in each county were trained by Dominion, but there's no evidence of any monitoring otherwise. We have testimony of different workers admitting that they were trained how to dispose of Trump votes and add to Biden votes. The software has a feature pursuant to which you can drag and drop any number of batches of votes to the candidate of your choice or simply throw them away. So we have mathematical evidence in a number of states of massive quantities of Trump votes being trashed. Just simply put it in the trash like you would on your computer with any file, and Biden votes being injected. That's addition to the flipping. I mean, it really happens in 2 ways. There's an algorithm that runs that automatically flips all the votes, and then each operator has the ability to go in, override settings. They can ignore a signature. They can ignore the top line of the ballot. They can go down ballot and select who they want to change the results for. The gentleman who founded Smartmatic, there's video of him on the internet explaining that yes, on at least one occasion he admits they changed 1 million votes with no problem.
It's time to move on and get to work for the American people. And I want to be very clear with the American people. The election's not in doubt. This is nothing more than a temper tantrum by Republicans, nothing more than a pathetic political performance for an audience of one, President Donald John Trump.
Many of the jurisdictions that have had this problem might not have known of the issues, but many did. And I think a full-scale criminal investigation needs to be undertaken immediately by the Department of Justice and by every state's equivalent, Attorney General's office or state investigatory unit, because there's evidence of different benefits being provided to the people who spent $100 million of taxpayer money at the last minute for their state to get the Dominion voting systems put in time for this election.
The widespread voter fraud that they're alleging, and there isn't any. Remember, the Trump campaign wants you to believe this legal effort is about fraud on a massive scale. The outcome of this election is clear, and no amount of dust that Trump and his allies kick up is going to change that.
In different ways. There's one person that a lawyer told me got, quote, election insurance, meaning that he would be able to make sure he was elected. I'm sure they explained that feature in detail to many people who expressed interest in putting this voting system in.
Voting irregularities that no one has seen any evidence of.
Time is up for President Trump to accept the judgment of the American voters. And as you just detailed in that last segment, there is no credible evidence of voter fraud. There is no credible path by which these election results can be reversed.
Texas denied certification of the Dominion system in 2019, but there are no doubt issues with the software that Texas did use, unbeknownst to Texas, I would imagine, since they went to great trouble to examine the Dominion systems and reject them. But other software, the source code that does the alterations is embedded, we have been told, in the source code all across the country in all the voting machines. There's no doubt it has been used to alter elections in other countries. We know specifically that Venezuela exported it for that purpose to Argentina and other Latin American companies to make sure that the corrupt rulers who were willing to pay the highest price for being in office were allowed to rig their elections. This is stunning, heartbreaking, infuriating, and the most unpatriotic acts I can even imagine for people in this country to have participated in any way, shape, or form. And I want the American public to know right now that we will not be intimidated. American patriots are fed up with the corruption from the local level to the highest level of our government, and we are going to take this country back. We are not going to be intimidated. We are not going to back down. We are going to clean this mess up now. President Trump won by a landslide. We are going to prove it, and we are going to reclaim the United States of America for the people who vote for freedom.
Baseless claims by the president and his supporters that there's been widespread voter fraud and that the election was somehow rigged or stolen from President Trump. That kind of rhetoric is extremely dangerous, extremely poisonous to our democracy. As in any campaign, the president has a right to bring legal challenges or request recounts where state law allows. However, there is no legal right to file frivolous claims. Lawsuits must have basis in facts, in evidence. And make no mistake, there has been no evidence of any significant widespread voter fraud. Joe Biden won this election fair and square. The margins of his victory are growing by the day.
The world is watching this. I have gotten multiple emails from people in other countries who watched the same pattern happen there. We have witnessed testimony that the same things were done in those countries as this was exported from Venezuela and by Maduro and by Mr. Chavez and by Cuba. And of course, we know China also has a substantial presence in Venezuela and substantial interest in making sure that President Trump does not continue in office. This is the consummate foreign interference in our election in the most criminal way you can possibly imagine. It must be shut down. We know, for example, that one of the Dominion's highest level employees or officers went to Detroit himself to man the Detroit Operations Center, where he could watch the votes coming in real time and decide what file folder in the system to put those votes into. That's why you see massive spikes after hours when people were told that all the votes were in and all the votes were counted. Many Dominion employees have already reached out to us to tell us the truth. They are Americans who want to ensure election integrity like we do. I would encourage every Dominion or Smartmatic employee who is fed up with the corruption in this country to come forward as soon as possible, because these are serious federal offenses that I am confident the Department of Justice will be in pursuit of in very short order if they are not already.
Giving the right message matters.